On today's episode of Derbyshire Farmers, we're diving into a disease that every sheepkeeper should be aware of, Caseous Lymphadenitis, or CLA for short. Now, Caseous Lymphadenitis, CLA, is a chronic and contagious condition in sheep and goats, and it's caused by a bacterium called Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis. Once it gets into the animal, it attacks the lymphatic system, that's the system responsible for transporting lymph fluid and fighting off infections. What we typically see in an infected animal are abscesses, usually around the head and neck, especially in the lymph nodes behind the jaw or near the shoulder. These lumps are filled with a thick, cheesy pus, hence the name caseous, which means cheese-like. Over time, these abscesses can rupture, spreading infectious material into the environment, and that's where the real problem begins. Because once the bacteria is in the soil, on your fencing, your feeders, or your equipment, it can survive for months, just waiting to infect another sheep, usually through a cut, scratch, or a shearing nick. Some animals don't even show symptoms but are still carriers, spreading the disease quietly through the flock. And what makes Caseous Lymphadenitis, CLA, particularly frustrating is that it doesn't just cause visible abscesses. The infection can also go internal, affecting the lungs, liver, or internal lymph nodes. This can lead to weight loss, poor condition, and ongoing ill thrift without any clear external signs. In many flocks, this slow internal spread goes unnoticed until productivity drops or animals start dying prematurely. It's a disease that can smolder quietly for years in a flock if it's not identified and managed early. And once it's established, it can be a long, hard road trying to clear it out. So how does this bacterium work, and what makes it so hard to control? What is the bacterium Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis? Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis is the bug behind Caseous Lymphadenitis. It's a tough little customer, a rod-shaped bacterium that thrives in sheep and goats, but it can also infect horses and even cattle under the right conditions. It's what we call a facultative intracellular pathogen. In simple terms, that means it can live both inside and outside host cells. Once it gets inside the animal, usually through a small wound or abrasion, it's very good at hiding from the immune system. It actually survives inside white blood cells called macrophages, which are meant to destroy invaders. Instead, this bacterium turns them into safe havens. What does it feed on? Well, it doesn't need anything fancy. It uses nutrients from damaged host tissue, especially lipids, amino acids, and iron. When it kills host cells, it basically releases a buffet of nutrients for itself and any fellow bacteria. That's what allows it to thrive in those thick-walled abscesses, where antibiotics and immune cells struggle to reach. It spreads mostly through direct contact with the pus from a ruptured abscess or through shared shearing equipment, needles, feed troughs, or anything else that's been contaminated. Because the bacteria can survive in the environment for several months, it can easily linger on your land or in the housing areas if hygiene isn't strict. In terms of how contagious it is, it's not airborne like a cold, but it spreads very effectively through wounds and close contact. In flocks where animals are kept close together, like during shearing or in holding pens, it can move quickly from one animal to another. That's why biosecurity is so important. A single abscess can end up contaminating everything around it. But what really gives this bacterium the upper hand and makes it such a persistent problem is a toxin it secretes, which we'll explore next. Does it secrete phospholipase D? Yes, and this is a key point. Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis secretes a particularly nasty toxin called phospholipase D, or PLD. PLD is one of the main reasons this bacterium is so difficult to control. It's a powerful enzyme that breaks down sphingomyelin, a component of cell membranes, especially in blood vessels and immune cells. By damaging these structures, PLD allows the bacterium to spread through the lymphatic system, hopping from one lymph node to the next. It doesn't just help the bacterium move. PLD also contributes to the destruction of host tissue, creating the perfect conditions for abscess formation. It increases the permeability of blood vessels, making it easier for the infection to seep deeper into the body. It even interferes with the immune system's ability to mount a proper defense, helping the bacteria avoid detection and attack. This means once an animal is infected, especially if the abscesses go unnoticed, the disease can become chronic, flaring up again and again or slowly spreading internally without any obvious signs until it's too late. PLD is so important to the disease process that it's often used in diagnostic testing and is a target in some vaccination strategies. Understanding this toxin is key to understanding why CLA is so persistent, so damaging, and so hard to eradicate from an infected flock. Diagnosing Caseous Lymphadenitis in sheep. In the last part, we looked at how Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis causes CLA and how its secret weapon, phospholipase D, helps it spread and hide. Now let's get into something just as important. How do you actually diagnose CLA in your flock? The most obvious signs are, of course, those firm abscesses, usually on the neck, under the jaw, or behind the ears. Sometimes they appear near the shoulder or flanks. If you cut into one, you'll often find that thick, dry, cheese-like pus inside. But, and here's the catch, not all abscesses are CLA and not all CLA is visible externally. That's why a proper diagnosis needs a bit more than just a visual once-over. The most straightforward way to confirm CLA is by taking a sample of the pus from an abscess and sending it to a lab. They'll culture it, meaning they grow the bacteria in a dish and identify whether Corynebacterium pseudotuberculosis is present. This is called a bacterial culture, and it's still the gold standard for confirming the disease. But culturing takes time, sometimes several days, and the bacteria doesn't always grow, especially if the abscess has been lingering or treated before. So another option is blood testing or serology. One of the most common blood tests is called the ELISA test, which detects antibodies against that toxin we mentioned earlier. Phospholipase D, if the animal has been exposed to CLA, it will likely have produced antibodies in response. It's not perfect, false positives and negatives do happen, but it's a useful tool, especially for screening the whole flock or testing animals that don't have obvious abscesses. The ELISA test is particularly good for picking up internal infections, where abscesses may be hidden deep in the body, say in the lungs or internal lymph nodes, and never burst or show outward signs. In these cases, sheep may simply lose condition or suffer repeated illness, and the cause remains a mystery unless you dig deeper. In some situations, particularly with valuable breeding stock, a post-mortem examination might be used. If a sheep dies or is culled, opening up the body and inspecting for internal abscesses can provide strong evidence of CLA spreading beyond the surface. Early diagnosis is key, especially if you want to protect the rest of your flock. But even once you've confirmed CLA, the next question is what to do about it. Let's be honest, Caseous lymphadenitis is difficult to manage, and once it's in your flock, you're in it for the long haul. There's no quick fix. But there are steps you can take to control the spread, protect your healthy animals, and reduce the long-term impact. Let's start with treatment. Once a sheep has developed a CLA abscess, antibiotics are not usually effective, and here's why. The abscesses are walled off with thick scar tissue, which antibiotics struggle to penetrate. Even if the bacteria inside are killed, the abscess remains a source of infection unless it's properly dealt with. Some farmers choose to lance and drain abscesses, but this comes with a big warning: the pus is highly infectious. If you decide to do this, it needs to be done in strict isolation, ideally well away from the rest of the flock, with all contaminated bedding, clothing, and tools disinfected or destroyed. And the wound needs to be flushed thoroughly and kept clean until it heals. Some producers prefer to cull infected animals, particularly in flocks where high health status is a priority, such as pedigree or closed breeding flocks. This may seem harsh, but it's often the most effective way to eliminate the disease and prevent it from spreading further. Now, let's talk about prevention and control. One of the best long-term strategies is vaccination. In the UK, CLA vaccines are not always easy to source, but where available, they can help reduce the severity of disease and the number of new abscesses. They don't eliminate infection entirely, but they're a useful part of a broader control plan. If a vaccine becomes licensed and available here, it's well worth considering, particularly if you've had a confirmed outbreak. Equally important is biosecurity. This includes disinfecting shearing equipment between animals, never sharing needles, isolating new or returning stock for several weeks, and avoiding close contact between clean and potentially infected animals. Remember, the bacteria can survive in soil and contaminated surfaces for months. If you're bringing in new sheep, it's wise to blood test them first or buy from CLA-free flocks. Some farmers are now moving towards certified CLA-free breeding schemes, which are gaining traction slowly here in the UK. And finally, communication with your vet is key. They can help you set up a testing schedule, advise on culling versus treatment, and guide you if you plan to work towards eradication in your flock. In short, CLA is manageable, but only if you take it seriously. It doesn't go away on its own. But with consistent hygiene, sensible culling, and testing, you can reduce the impact, limit the spread, and protect the health and productivity of your flock. Now we're going one step further with something every sheep farmer should have in place: a biosecurity plan. Now, biosecurity might sound like something reserved for big commercial farms, but the truth is, no matter the size of your flock, keeping disease out and under control starts with small, simple habits that make a big difference. So what does a proper biosecurity plan actually look like? It starts with a mindset, a shift in thinking. The goal is to stop diseases before they get in and to contain any that might already be present. This is especially important for conditions like CLA, which can spread slowly and silently through a flock over time. The first pillar of a strong biosecurity plan is control at the gate. That means anything coming onto your land, sheep, vehicles, equipment, feed, needs to be looked at with suspicion. New sheep should never go straight into your main flock, even if they look healthy. Always isolate them for at least 3 to 4 weeks. During that time, you can monitor them for signs of disease, test for CLA or other conditions, and treat any issues before they spread. And if you're buying in rams or breeding ewes, always try to buy from flocks with a known health status or that participate in health assurance schemes. It's tempting to go for a cheap buy, but bringing disease onto your land can end up being a very expensive mistake. How much is it really costing you? Because here's the truth most small farmers don't hear often enough. CLA might not kill your sheep outright, but it will slowly bleed your wallet. Let's break it down. First, the obvious losses. Sheep with visible abscesses, especially around the neck or jaw, often fetch lower prices at market. Buyers don't want the risk. Even if the animal is perfectly healthy otherwise, that single lump can knock 10 pounds, 20 pounds, sometimes even more off the sale price. For pedigree or breeding stock, the hit can be far worse, hundreds of pounds, because CLA raises serious red flags about flock health and disease status. Then there's condemnation at slaughter. If a carcass shows signs of internal abscesses, the whole thing or parts of it can be condemned. That's a direct loss. The animal you fed and cared for months, worth 100 pounds or more, is suddenly worth nothing. You don't just lose the animal, you lose your investment in its feed, time, medication, and shelter. But CLA's impact goes far deeper than just a few bad sales. Let's talk about reduced productivity. Sheep with internal CLA often look fine from the outside, but inside they're fighting chronic infection. That means poor weight gain, lower fertility, and increased feed requirements just to keep condition. It's like dragging a trailer uphill every day. They can do it, but not well. In ewes, CLA can reduce milk production, impacting lamb growth. In rams, it can lower fertility and even lead to culling if abscesses develop in the testicles or lymph nodes. And here's the rub: these losses are often missed. Farmers chalk it up to poor doers or bad weather, when it's actually CLA working quietly in the background. Then we come to management costs. Dealing with CLA means more time handling animals, isolating infected sheep, disinfecting pens, testing, draining abscesses, or calling out the vet. These all cost money and time. Time you could be spending elsewhere on the farm. There's also the cost of reputation. If you're selling breeding stock or pedigree animals and word gets out your flock has CLA, buyers might stop coming. You may need to test and certify disease status just to stay competitive, and that has its own cost in testing fees, vet bills, and lost sales while waiting for results. And let's not forget the long game. If you're not tackling CLA now, it may take years to undo the damage. A persistent, unmanaged infection will spread slowly, but surely through your flock, affecting the next generation and the next. By the time it becomes obvious, the cost of clearing it out might involve culling a huge proportion of your animals. So what's the total price tag? Well, studies and industry reports suggest that flocks with ongoing CLA problems can lose 5 to 15% of their annual value, sometimes more depending on how widespread the infection is and what markets you're aiming for. For a 100 flock, that's potentially 1,000 pounds to 3,000 pounds a year or more in high-value operations. And that's every single year it goes unchecked. Now compare that to the cost of prevention, a few blood tests, some disinfectant, careful isolation, and a shift in habits. That's often a few pounds per head at most. It's easy to ignore CLA when it's not killing sheep outright, but make no mistake, it's killing your margins, quietly, year after year. So if you're trying to make your farm pay or even just keep it sustainable, CLA can't be brushed off as one of those things. It's a thief in your flock. And like any thief, the sooner you deal with it, the better. Thank you for watching Derbyshire Farmers. Don't forget to subscribe for more farming tips and insights.